Folks, we are back. Great to be back with you. We were about to get started with our next session, our final session of the day, Paving a Path to the Polls, Overcoming Process Barriers Through Student Voter Education, presented by Nicole Costa, Campus Outreach Lead at Democracy Works, and Hannah Shaw, Project Coordinator at the Center for Creative Citizenship at the Maryland Institute College of Art. Before we get started, just a few reminders. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome, and some housekeeping pieces. One, note that if by participating in this event, you're agreeing to abide by our code of conduct. Our staff will be sharing that in the chat now. We want to make sure that this space is safe and respectful and for constructive conversation. So we appreciate you taking some time to familiarize yourself with the policy. If you have any questions, the question period will come at the end. You can put those in the chat in Facebook Live or YouTube or wherever you're joining us from, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. And if you have any technical issues, you can also post that in the live chat and our staff will help address that issue. At this time, I will turn it over to our presenters. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Can we see these slides? Cool. Hey, everyone. Welcome to our session. Again, the title is Paving a Path to the Polls, Overcoming Process Barriers Through Student Voter Education. And so quickly, I want to give us an agenda. Hannah and I are going to introduce ourselves. We'll talk a little bit about how we define a process barrier to voting. And then we're going to get into the content of how do we navigate these process barriers and how do we do that through voter education. So Hannah, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Hannah Shaw. I'm a project coordinator with the Center for Creative Citizenship, formerly the Office of Community Engagement at MICA, and I work on our Voter Access Initiative team.
And my name is Nicole Costa, and I'm the Campus Outreach Lead at Democracy Works, who are the makers of TurboVote.
So a little background, MICA is an art and design school, and we're located in Baltimore, Maryland. Founded in 1826, we have a long history of incorporating civic learning and democratic engagement. We'll go to the next slide. So how and when did our Voter Access Initiative start? In 2015, the college launched an effort to fundamentally rethink community engagement at MICA. And in 2016, a group of students formed a student interest group called the Political Engagement Club, now known as the MICA Organizers and Activists, and they began to work with local and national organizations aimed to increase student voter participation. And from this, it was clear that there was a large need for this work and that students couldn't be the only ones supporting it. So that effort laid the foundation for MICA's Voter Access Initiative, a strategy to increase voter participation on campus. And a critical part of our work, as you can see in the photos and maybe behind me, is utilizing our strengths at MICA, art and design. So our campus is bubbling with creative ways to get involved, and we wanted to tap into that energy by engaging students, faculty, and staff in designing vibrant posters, making get out the vote buttons, sharing voting related photos and messages, and we aim to create a culture of excitement around voter participation and other forms of civic action. And so Nicole will talk about her work.
You probably heard about Democracy Works and our flagship tool, TurboVote. Democracy Works is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we build civic technology for both voters and election officials. We launched about 10 years ago, our first tool, TurboVote, and we partner with colleges and universities, more than 140 of them now, to make voting more accessible to students by giving them the tools and the data to participate in every election. So when we came into this topic of why students don't vote, we often think about the idea that it's apathy. Students don't want to vote because they're not interested or because they don't like the candidates. But according to the United States Census, in 2016, 46.5% of 18 to 29-year-olds indicated that it was a process issue that prevented them from voting. when we think about process issues, we wanted to give you a really good example of what that looks like outside the realm of voting. So imagine you have 1,000 students on your campus who can apply to receive a federal financial aid grant to cover their full tuition. But 415 of them said that they couldn't because they didn't understand the directions. The directions are a process barrier. So how do we navigate that? One way to help students access that grant to have their full tuition covered is by giving them the information, resources, and support so that they can successfully navigate the application process. Hence, education to navigate a process barrier. We're going to define, in the world of voter engagement, a process barrier is a technical or administrative complexity that prevents a voter from successfully casting a ballot. And to kind of name what those look like, again, thinking about that 2016 data from the Census Bureau, 18 to 29-year-olds said they didn't vote because they were too busy or they had a conflicting schedule, meaning that they didn't think that they could vote on election day. They were out of town, or they didn't know that they could vote by mail. They had a problem with their registration. They didn't know that election day was happening, or they forgot. They couldn't access the polls because of an illness or a disability. Their polling place wasn't in a convenient location, or they had a transportation problem. And so Hannah is going to talk a little bit about how we do this.
So how do we intentionally educate students to navigate process barriers? Well, in order to help students, we need to understand what those barriers are specific to your student population in order to design effective strategies to mitigate them. And one way to do this is by creating an action plan. So there are several organizations that support evaluating democratic action plans. In 2018, Micah joined the All-In Campus Democracy Challenge Action Plan. So you'll see the sections are outlined on the slide, and I'm going to highlight a few of them. One of them is leadership. This is where you identify everybody helping you on the work, and it's really critical to have a cross-campus strategy or a cross-campus team. So this includes academic affairs, student affairs, students, community partners, and your local election office. Identify the roles and responsibilities of everyone involved and create a plan so if one person leaves, you know how the work will be continued. So this was really helpful for us because we think long-term when we're documenting our efforts so that the work can be easily passed off to anyone new that comes in. Another section that I want to highlight is landscape, and this is really the crux of identifying those gaps to target your strategy. This includes analyzing student voter data, which you can use NSOLVE, the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement. So Micah, by looking at our NSOLVE data from the last midterm election when we were doing the 2018 election, we noticed that first-year students had a slightly lower voter turnout than other students on campus. And this meant that our strategy focused on first-year orientation, on other first-year courses and events. Also in the landscape section, this is where you understand the campus climate and all the different institutional efforts for improving democratic engagement. So you take inventory of what's happening on campus, what is working, and where are the gaps or areas for opportunity. The last section I'll highlight is evaluation, just because we can't forget about this. It's critical to be intentional from the start about how you're going to evaluate your work, both qualitative and quantitative. So one strategy we used at Micah, at the end of the school year, we invited everybody to a meeting and posted reflection questions all around the room. And so we had students, staff, and faculty respond to the questions on Post-its, and then we took that information, synthesized it, and shared it back out to the entire team to help inform our strategy for the next year.
Quickly going to jump in here to say that there are lots of people and resources who can support your action planning efforts. I will send out this slide deck into the student voting Slack channel during that campus compact to set up for the conference, noting that the Strengthening American Democracy Guide is a really great place to start, and it's kind of informing everybody in the student voter engagement spaces understanding of action planning. My team here at Democracy Works created Votes and Ballots, which is an action planning activity. It's a game that an activity that gamifies action planning to make it fun and an exciting way to think about action planning. Shouting out my friends at the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition, who presented the session just before ours, who help support action planning and support other organizations that do action planning efforts. And then two activities, plans, engagements that do this sort of work, the All in Campus Democracy Challenge out of Civic Nation, and then the Voter Friendly Campus designation from Campus Vote Project and NASPA. So how do we figure out what our process barriers are and how to navigate those? First, I want to shout out doing your research. It's not easy to figure out what's preventing students from being able to participate unless you've done a deep dive into what the landscape for voting looks like. You can know where your polling places are, knowing if voter ID is necessary, and what those voter ID types are if you have it. Know if there are complexities around formatting addresses for registering on campus, and knowing if you need an excuse to vote by mail. You can work with your local election officials to figure all of this out, and also you can lean on community partners like the folks at All In, like the folks in the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition, like the folks at Campus Vote Project, and people like us at TurboVote. Noting that one way to navigate these process barriers is to lean on somebody like a civic tech provider. I work for Democracy Works, makers of TurboVote, and we help campuses, colleges, and universities navigate process barriers through our higher education campus partnerships. Really quickly, because a lot of folks know who what TurboVote is and what we do. TurboVote provides services to help people navigate the registration process. We help folks request their vote by mail, or we provide the ability for folks to access the request forms to receive their by mail ballots. We provide notifications and reminders for all elections with 5,000 or more voters, and we have a help desk. So if you respond to any of our notifications, you'll have a real live person helping you navigate the voting process. And this is available to all of your students through our public site, turbovote.org, or through a partnership with us where we make that accessible to your students specifically via your campus's site. General guidelines for navigating process barriers. One, make it the directions as easy, clear, and accessible as possible. Election language is kind of jargony, and it can be hard to understand. Is an absentee ballot the same thing as voting by mail? Is an absentee ballot the same thing as early voting? The words are a little bit complex. So if you can distill those down to their most basic elements, it's a little bit easier for students to understand and makes it a little bit more relevant. Use multiple methods of engagement. You can do things in person if we're back on campus from between now and Election Day in November and for future elections. You can do it by email. You can do it through online learning portals. There's lots of different ways, and there's lots of different people who can be doing this work. And so the more students get that access and that engagement, the more it's going to stick. Providing support is essential. RAs are the people that students go to when they think about housing. They ask those questions. Academic advisors help students figure out how to graduate on time to complete their course load with their majors. There should be somebody on campus who's doing the work of answering questions and providing support specifically related to voting. That can be you, that can be your colleagues, that could be folks within your community at large. When we start talking about voting, make sure that there's an action item to push students to take that next step, whether that's completing a voter registration form or doing online voter registration. It's creating a plan to vote. It's getting out to an activity on campus or an online webinar related to student voting. And whenever we're doing that engagement, doing some follow-up afterward to ensure that students know that they have that support and that there's a continued process to move things forward and get to voting. Generally speaking, there are some like high-level promising practices related to educating student voters that I want to touch on. New student orientation activities are a great place to push that education component into the student experience. Most students are going to be involved, so it's a great place to start teaching folks how to vote as a student at your college or university. Again, general education courses are great places because they're a gateway for students to really begin the conversation with as a student in your community and how your community is made up of voters. Other places that you can interact now that we're doing lots of stuff online, learning management systems like Canvas or Blackboard or D2L, student engagement platforms like Campus Labs Engage. Some people think of those as like they're where students are learning about organizations and being involved in activities. Another best practice that we'd like to think about is having that information come from lots of different people that students trust. Students trust each other, so having that peer-to-peer engagement. Students trust their teachers, the classroom activities, so having it come from faculty, having it come from staff, so folks in your civic engagement center, but also in student involvement and folks in career centers. And then having community members be a part of that conversation, whether that's students who are on campuses like voting related like fellowships, or having the League of Women Voters talking to students, or maybe it is folks that are doing volunteer activities. Having that repetition and that exposure and having it come from people that students know they can trust. Now I'm going to toss it over to Hannah to talk about how this happens in real life and how it happened at MICA.
So as I mentioned before, we want to come from a place of celebration and fun. We don't want any voter education to feel like another homework assignment or project. So we can go to the next slide. A critical tactic of our voter access initiative is our collaboration with the Globe Collection and Press at MICA. It's a historic press that is now used for teaching traditional print, poster making, and its relationship to political and cultural communication. Art and design has always played a critical role in political campaigns. So one of the projects that we've done each year since we started is to create these MICA Votes flyers, which contain important voting information geared towards students. It answers students' most frequently asked questions, such as, should I vote in Baltimore or my hometown? It also includes ways to get involved in the elections beyond voting. We distributed the flyers at student orientations, school events, and some of the other key places that Nicole had mentioned. And in 2018, we distributed over 1,000 flyers, which quickly decorated the campus and became the first visuals to launch and connect our Voter Access Initiative events. Another Globe strategy has been creating vote posters, which are behind me. In 2018, we printed 1,200 vote posters and distributed them all over. They went to local community partners, as you can see in these photos. There's Baltimore Design School and Impact Hub. We also shared them with partners across the country, MICA students and community members, local elected officials, and we made them available for download. So while we had digital versions in the past, recently due to COVID, we've put much more emphasis on creating digital files to share broadly. You can see here some examples for, we'll keep it on the back one, for our recent special election, which was in April. And then to the right of the slide, you'll see some graphics for the Maryland primary election. And now we can go to the next slide. We recently partnered with local organizations Baltimore Votes and Black Girls Vote to create collateral for Party at the Mailbox. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Party at the Polls. This is the new pivot or take on that in this current election. And so they're working to create a box that will be sent to anyone that signs up in Baltimore for free. And it has coloring pages, word puzzles, a true mix of fun and education. And our hope is that people will color these, put them in the windows, because so many more people are going for walks, and still you might not get your voting sticker because Maryland now is vote by mail primarily, but you can make your own button or sticker and posters. And so we're really excited to share that these nonpartisan materials are available for anyone to download or print and share on social media. So if you go to bit.ly/globe-votes, you can find all of the downloads there.
I will also note that I will post this link in the student voting channel in Slack, and you can come talk to us about student voting in the networking hours tomorrow. So Micah is great at art and design, but you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to become design experts, and you don't need to do things that are outside what your students are already doing. When you're thinking about how do we educate students, thinking about like, what is your institution already good at? What are your students interested in? And then start there. There are people on campus who are experts in things already, and so we're going to utilize their expertise to continue to push the information into the places that students are interacting. Examples of that on other campuses. If you've interacted with Louisiana State University, you might know that they have a pretty good social media presence. And so their student voting organization called Go Vote have a social media presence that has lots of voter information. They're in their collections, their story collections on their profile on Instagram. They have this FAQ saved, and it gives lots of information about voting and participating. It'll point students toward TurboVote, but it'll also give them more in-depth information about their options as student voters. Shout out, you should go follow them on Instagram at GoVoteLSU. USF Votes at the University of San Francisco have hosted on-campus events talking about things that are issue-based. You might know that if you've followed some of the research around motivations to vote, that Gen Z's young people's, I feel so old saying that, respond well to connecting voting to issue-related content. So at USF, there's a big push for talking about climate justice-related topics. And so they've engaged USF Votes into those conversations. Noting that if you're worried about nonpartisanship, having partners in the space that are doing this work is going to be your biggest success point. Having more people and more voices talking about voting from all perspectives and from all of sides of the spectrum means that more students are going to be involved in the conversation. More students are going to hear these topics. They're going to have greater exposure. They're going to get that education that's going to be able to allow them to get involved and vote on election day. Shouting out to my friends at USF. You can follow them on Instagram at USF Votes too. At the University of Michigan, it's an enormous institution. I was 100% this morning watching the University of Michigan halftime show from 2018 about voting. Highly recommend checking that out on YouTube. You can search it. I'll post it in the student voting channel in Slack as well. But the University of Michigan is enormous, and so lots of students are engaging with the technology that's widespread and across campus and across the student population. So they use their learning management system called Canvas to post a banner that had information about voting and push students to their TurboVote site. But they also have a voting website now. And that's an opportunity for students to be engaging when we're doing this work digitally. I can't shout out their social media because I don't know their handle offhand. Sorry, University of Michigan. And a last note to say that when we think about voting, it can't just be during election years. Right now, it's really exciting to talk about voting because we have a really big event coming up in a couple months, and there are lots of folks doing things related to primaries still right now. I'm in New Jersey. Our primary is coming up in 3 weeks, I think. I've already submitted my mail ballot. But we want to make voting a part of every student's education, and we want that to be happening every single year. That looks like institutionalization. Institutionalization is making voting a part of the infrastructure of your college, your university. And that's going to look different on every campus. But we want an institutional commitment that ensures all students are learning about voting and have access to the ballot. we mentioned new student orientation as one of those opportunities, and making sure that happens in every single new student orientation. But that could look like having voting talked about during academic advising sessions. You could have it during first-year seminars or first-year courses. You could commit to having National Voter Registration Day placed on the calendar for every year on campus. We have Constitution Day on the calendar because there's a federal mandate. Like, why not make it an institutional mandate to have National Voter Registration Day a part of that? And then there are other institutionalizations that use technology and digital incorporations. You could do that through a student portal, a learning management system, again, student engagement platforms. You could think about somebody like the University of Chicago that made it voter registration and TurboVote signups as a part of their annual check-in process. There are lots of different options, and there are tons of resources from the folks that I've mentioned throughout this session, and they would love to help you get involved. And if you would like to think about joining up and partnering with TurboVote, you can, of course, ask me about that, and I'm happy to talk to you about it. And so that kind of wraps up our general high-level look at voter education as a tool to navigate process barriers. And we'd love to field some questions if there are any.
Yes, there's questions from our viewers. So first, what kinds of research tools or approaches are recommended for identifying process barriers?
I think it depends on where you're located. The place that I would first recommend is going to your local election authority or your state Secretary of State's website and reading up about how to vote in the jurisdiction of where your students are going to be voting. I posted this in the student voting Slack channel earlier. Democracy Works created a website called alerts.howto.vote. I believe is the full URL, and it has a compilation of links that'll push you to the election authorities where you can be engaging with the content they are providing out. Other people that are putting out information on how to vote, so you can think Campus Vote Project has the state student voting guides. The League of Women Voters has Vote 411, or 411 Vote. I'm sorry, I just got that wrong one way or the other. But your states should be, and the government officials who are doing the election work should be the first priority when it comes to getting that information. And then community partners in the space, whether that's TurboVote and Democracy Works, or other community partners that you already have relationships with. And if not, check in with the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition. We'd love to help you.
Great, thanks. And by the way, I love the idea of party at the polls. I'm all about making this process fun and engaging. And so thank you for mentioning that. So our next question is, how are efforts to encourage student political participation changing with COVID-19?
I think Hannah really highlighted how to make the work around voter engagement to go home and be a part of the students' lives when they're not in the classroom and engagement. Hannah, do you want to talk about a few of those things that you mentioned previously before I jump in about other digital tactics?
Sure. I'll just speak more broadly. I think at MICA, we were really trying to be careful because we understood at the same time students were being sent home. There's a lot happening right now, and so we didn't want to bombard students with even more emails or messages or events. And at the same time, voting is a space where we have power to have an influence. So we wanted to encourage that now more than ever, it's important to participate. As far as how to engage during COVID, if that was the question, we're still figuring this out, a mix between, trying to host some online events. We had someone come in and talk to our students about how to be civically engaged among COVID. So, bringing other experts in to have workshops with students, and then just meeting and working closely with students to ask them what's helpful. It's to be quite frank, it's still a space that we're navigating.
Absolutely, we're all trying to figure this out together. So here's a question about funding. So where do you get your funding? Are there any grants for the printing of these posters or to fund student engagement work on campus?
I can jump in and shout out a couple of things. The student voter engagement space is full of organizations and folks who want to help support the work that you're doing on the ground. Students Learn, Students Vote has done some grants over the last several years related to voter engagement on campuses. There were grants related to Party at the Polls, I believe. National Voter Registration Day has some grants that go out to do campus takeovers. I don't know what that's going to look like this year, and I think none of us really know because we don't know if we're going to be back on campuses come the end of September. But I think that the best place you can start is to get involved with some organizations that are doing this work and that are committed to working with colleges and universities. In terms of other ways to think about getting funding, I think it comes down to, in a lot of ways, institutional commitment and allyship. Whether that's going to the president's or the chancellor's office or the provost's office and saying, like, what is your commitment to student voting, and then make that actionable by some commitment to a partnership with TurboVote, or having the campus or like the marketing department commit to printing flyers and mailing them to every student. Calling in on the institution's commitment to student voting and making that a priority. And then finding allies in like non-typical places. Not everything needs to cost a lot of money. You could think about, what if we took some of the graphics that Micah created and now make those backgrounds for, say, computers on campus, if we make it back to campus, or if they appear as like smaller images on social media stories, or in like emails and things like that. There's obviously a lot of space where money is going to make a huge difference. And we encourage you to partner with folks to bring their expertise and their resources into the work that you're doing, but also taking advantage of the opportunities that, like, because we're not in person, there's some space to be using the free technology that allows you to push the initiatives forward, even if we're not together in person.
Right. And I guess kind of speaking on that, for someone, this is a question, for someone who goes to a school that doesn't focus on design, are there free templates for posters that other schools can use? I think you had mentioned that, Hannah. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, we do have our designs available for anyone to download and use. So we can send that link out. And also, if you go to mica.edu/vote, you can find them there. And I believe TurboVote also has a package of graphics that anyone can use on social media. So there are free graphics out there, and we're pretty excited to share them.
Yeah, and I love the graphics that you have there. I want to print some and put them in my house. So there's another question that's coming. Issue-based engagement is tricky as a state-funded university. This person shares, how are institutions navigating this?
I can speak at MICA. We make a clear distinction. I mentioned there's the MICA organizers and activists, and so through the student group, they really take a stance on issues that, as an institution, we can't and we don't play a role in that. So that division is I would say where students come in, and if you have very active political students on campus, that's sort of their space to shine. And as an institution, we take a step back, and we don't take a stance, and we just support in any efforts that our students are interested in.
That's important.
I'll also highlight that this might be a time where you can be engaging faculty who are doing research around topics that students are really interested in, having them speak about things and link the work that they're doing to voter engagement efforts and voting, as a way for folks to be seeing the application, as well as being able to have those like challenging conversations that might otherwise be seen as partisan. Another thing to note that bringing elected officials to campus, like an elected official isn't partisan because they're already elected and they represent your district. I mean, obviously we can't bring anybody to campuses right now, but if you were able to have a webinar with them, or a conference call, or a virtual town hall meeting, having those folks being able to be present and talking about issues and how they stand on them, it's just one way that students can continue to get that exposure and think about how their vote is impacting what legislation and policy is going to look like.
Yeah, that reminds me, when I used to work at the University of Laverne, we worked with the students from the Democratic Student Organization, the Republican Student Organization, to do these cafecitos con políticos. So it's just these kind of coffee hours with elected officials, where it's very relaxed, and students would guide the questioning. And it was great to just see how they engaged in that process. There's a few more questions that I think we can get to before we end. So this person asks, I'd love to know how to increase student voter registration when there are concerns that university leadership may be hesitant that even voting is too political.
Well, I'm going to take one step back and do the leveraging federal legislation thing, where the Higher Education Act says that folks have to, or colleges and universities have to make voter registration materials available to students. There is a federal mandate for that, and it is their responsibility. That is like the easiest way to frame it, and say, thinking about something like Constitution Day, where there's a mandate for colleges and universities to be celebrating that and sharing that information and leveraging those moments effectively. Zooming out a little bit further than that, I like to think about voting as a core component of like student development, and saying that like your civic life is as much a part of your professional development as learning how to use Microsoft Excel or being able to speak effectively in front of groups. Your civic participation is a part of your human development, and framing it as like, we want to prepare our students to be impactful members of society could be a way to leverage like the moral side of things and the imperative that would otherwise interact with that, the icky feeling of, is this too political?
Right, thanks. And then this is probably going to be the last question, but this person asks, would love to see examples of university voter institutionalization with deep awareness, sensitivity to undocumented student experience.
I can't think of any institutionalization pieces that are explicitly thinking, or that aren't already building in the idea that not everyone has the ability to register to vote. I'm going to talk about this from a TurboVote perspective, because this is what I'm an expert in. TurboVote will ask you, like, are you 18 years of age or older? And it's like, yes, I'm over the age of 18. No, I'm not. If it says no, it's like, hey, thank you for your interest in TurboVote, but we aren't able to support you right now. Come back if you become available, or if it becomes, if you age into being able to register to vote. Same thing with citizenship. Like, we're not able to service you right now. And like, it won't let folks get past the point where it will become like dangerous for them. The other pieces to think about is that when you think about voter registration and voter engagement, it's a fully opt-in opportunity, but then you can also have those other pieces like conversation and dialogue. So if you're incredibly fearful that having it built into some structural piece, like a step in a check-in, or having it as a piece of a process, okay, so maybe that's not an opportunity that you're able to leverage. But what if you asked every person who taught an intro to communications course, or every person that had like a freshman 101, which pains me to say, but having those courses making a conversation point, talking about voting and talking about civic life and talking about political participation, flexing your needs and your demands to the landscape that you're operating in. So much of things, literally everything about elections, is the answer is it depends, because we have to be sensitive to our landscape. But in those moments, I would suggest like leaning into the discomfort and like finding creative solutions and working with people who will help you find those creative solutions. That could be my colleagues and I at like Democracy Works and TurboVote. That could also be the folks at All In, the folks at Students Learn, Students Vote, the folks at Campus Vote Project, the folks at PERG. There are tons of people who would love to help you find creative solutions.
Yeah, and I think...
Oh, go ahead.
Micah. Yeah.
Okay, I would like to jump in on this question, and thank you for asking it, because it is so critical right now, and something that at Micah we're constantly thinking about. So actually, when we're thinking about institutionalization, at Micah, we're evolving our voter access initiative, and we're like rebranding ourselves and changing our names, because we want to think bigger than voting. So the initiative is now one piece of a broader and longer term strategic plan to integrate civic learning and action, as well as democratic engagement throughout the institution. In addition to undocumented students, we have 25% international students that aren't voting in US elections, and we don't want them to be left out of any civic learning and action. And so in any event that we plan, we are always designing a component for all students to be able to be involved. So in some of the photos, you might have seen lawn signs that are from Four Freedoms, which gave prompts like freedom from or freedom to, these big questions that all students are encouraged to participate. Another thing, during the midterm election, rather than highlighting it as a voting week, we branded it as Micah Voices Week, and we placed pink ballot boxes all over the campus and asked students to vote on what they found were the most important issues to them at that time. So it's such an important question and thing to consider, and it can't be left out of the conversation. And I do think we need to think more broadly about civic learning and action beyond voting.
Absolutely. Students can work polls, right? You don't need to be 18 to do that. You don't need to be a citizen to do that. The census, right? Participation in that. So there's ways to broaden our understanding of civic engagement besides or outside of just voting. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank you both for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Thank you to our attendees for participating in our virtual conference. For me, it feels like a real conference. We were kind of going back and forth and having kind of our little get-together sessions in the Slack room. So really exciting to close our second day, and just want to invite people to come back tomorrow. We start at 11 a.m. Eastern time, and you can check us out again on YouTube, Facebook, or any other, I think Twitter we're on too. So thank you both so much for your session, and thank you all for joining the Campus Compact 20 conference. Appreciate it.